"Sir, my mom's not waking up." The little girl said. Mafia boss turned pale and said, "Bring me to her." The wind off the bay in Harborview cut through the streets like a serrated knife, carrying the scent of salt, diesel, and old secrets. It was a Tuesday night in November, the kind of evening that forced honest citizens indoors and left the shadows to men like Adrian Valenti. Adrian sat in the back booth of Sal's Diner, a vinyl and chrome establishment that had not seen a renovation in 30 years. The air inside smelled of burnt coffee and frying onions. Across the table sat a nervous man named Donnelly, who was currently sweating through a shirt that cost less than Adrian's socks. "We are done here," Adrian said, his voice a low, smooth baritone that did not need to be raised to command attention. He adjusted the cuff of his charcoal suit jacket, the fabric Italian wool, tailored to hide the shoulder holster beneath his left arm. "The numbers on the ledger are correct. You continue to run the supply logistics for the restaurant chain, and you ensure that no inventory goes missing again. Do I make myself clear?" Donnelly nodded rapidly, his eyes darting to the scar that ran just along Adrian's jawline, a faint white line that hinted at a violent history. "Crystal clear. Mr. Valenti, thank you. I won't let you down." Adrian did not smile. He simply slid a single $50 bill onto the table to cover the coffee he had not touched, stood up, and walked out, to the world. Adrian Valenti was a successful entrepreneur, the owner of Valenti Bistro and a portfolio of prime real estate. To the underworld of Harborview, he was the calm center of a violent storm, a man who ruled with a strict code of silence and absolute order. He stepped out of the diner and into the biting cold. His driver, Marco, was waiting half a block down in the idling black sedan, but Adrian paused on the sidewalk to button his overcoat. The street was mostly empty, the street lamps flickering with that dying yellow buzz common in this part of the city. He felt a tug on his sleeve. It was faint, almost like the wind catching the fabric, but it was persistent. Adrian looked down. Standing there was a child, a little girl, perhaps 6 or 7 years old, wearing a pink jacket that was far too thin for the freezing temperature. Her hair was a tangled mess of blonde curls, and her face was pale, streaked with dried tears. She was shivering violently, her small hands gripping the expensive wool of his coat as if it were a lifeline. "Sir," the girl whispered, her voice trembling so hard the words barely formed. Adrian stiffened. His first instinct was to scan the street for a trap. A distracted target was a dead target, but the street was empty. It was just him and the child. He looked into her eyes and saw a terror that was raw and genuine. "Sir, my mom is not waking up." The blood drained from Adrian's face. The world of organized crime, territory disputes, and profit margins vanished in a single heartbeat. The sentence hit him with the force of a physical blow, dragging a memory from 20 years ago to the surface of his mind. A different apartment, a different mother, the same terrifying silence. He dropped to one knee immediately, ignoring the wet pavement ruining his suit trousers. Bringing himself to her eye level, the cold reserve he wore like armor shattered. "Where is she?" Adrian demanded, his voice sharp with urgency. Up the street, the girl sobbed, pointing a shaking finger toward the darker, denser tenements. "Bring me to her," Adrian said. He did not wait for her to answer. He stood up, offering his hand. The girl grabbed it, her fingers ice cold, and pulled him toward the alleyway that cut between 2 brick buildings. Adrian moved with long, purposeful strides, keeping pace with the running child. As they moved, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He did not dial 911. In his world, involving the police complicated things that required immediate, discreet solutions. He tapped a speed dial number. "I need you at the corner of 5th and Grand," Adrian said into the phone the second the line connected. "Bring the medical bag, the full kit. No questions." He hung up and texted Marco, "Stay close. Follow my signal." The girl led him past overflowing dumpsters and through a rusted chain-link gate that squealed in the night air. This was the edge, the part of Harborview where the city swept its dust. They entered a building with a broken front lock and a hallway that smelled of mildew and boiled cabbage. Top floor. the girl panted, her small legs pumping hard on the stairs. Adrian scooped her up without breaking his stride. "Which door?" he asked, taking the stairs 2 at a time. "Number 4B, she said, burying her face in his shoulder. He reached the 4th floor, his breathing controlled and steady despite the exertion. The door to 4B was ajar. Adrian set the girl down and pushed the door open with his shoulder, his eyes instantly scanning the room for threats before landing on the crisis. It was a studio apartment, cramped but meticulously clean, though the furniture was worn threadbare. In the center of the room, on a sagging beige couch, lay a woman. Adrian moved to her instantly. She was young, perhaps in her late 20s. Her dark hair fanned out over a cushion that looked like it had been taken from a thrift store. She was still wearing her work clothes, a pencil skirt and a white blouse that had seen too many wash cycles. One of her shoes had fallen off onto the floor. "Mommy?" the little girl whimpered from the doorway. "Stay there," Adrian commanded, though his tone was gentle. He knelt beside the woman, placing 2 fingers against her carotid artery. Her skin was clammy and cold. Her pulse was there, but it was thready and fast, fluttering like a trapped bird. He leaned close to her face, listening for breath. It was shallow, barely moving her chest. Adrian looked around the room, his eyes acting as a camera, recording details to deduce the cause. There were no needles, no empty pill bottles, no smell of alcohol. Instead, he saw a stack of overdue utility bills on the coffee table. Red final notice, stamps aggressive and bright. Beside the bills was a plate of half-eaten toast and an open textbook on accounting. This was not an overdose. This was a collapse. Exhaustion, Adrian muttered to himself. A surge of dark anger tightening his chest, not at the woman, but at a world that let this happen. The sound of heavy footsteps on the stairs announced the arrival of help. Doctor. Elias Thorne walked through the open door, breathless, carrying a heavy leather medical bag. Thorne was a man who had stitched up bullet wounds in basements and treated Mafia dons for heart conditions in penthouses. He knew how to keep his mouth shut. "She is on the couch," Adrian said, stepping back to give the doctor room. "Pulse is weak, respiration shallow, no signs of narcotics." Thorne worked quickly, pulling out a stethoscope and a blood pressure cuff. He lifted the woman's eyelids, shining a penlight into her pupils. "Severe dehydration," Thorne said after 30 seconds, his voice professional and clipped. "Her blood pressure is dangerously low. Look at her fingernails. Brittle. She is malnourished." "Adrian, she has run herself into the ground. Her body just decided to stop." "Can you stabilize her here?" Adrian asked. "I can give her fluids," Thorne said, pulling an IV bag from his kit. "But she needs a hospital. She needs a full workup to rule out heart failure or an underlying infection. If she stays here, she might slip into a coma." "No hospital," Adrian said instantly. "The public hospital would ask questions, call social services, and separate the mother from the child. Take her to the private clinic on the west side." "The one I own," Thorne paused, looking at Adrian. "That is a risk. People will talk." "Let them talk," Adrian said, his voice dropping to a growl. "Get Marco. We are moving her. Now." The little girl, who had been watching with wide, terrified eyes, suddenly lunged forward. She grabbed Adrian's hand again, squeezing it with frantic strength. "Is my mommy going to die?" she asked, her voice cracking. Adrian looked down at her. He saw the grime on her cheek and the sheer terror in her posture. He knelt down, ignoring the doctor and the chaos for a brief second. "No," Adrian said firmly. "I'm not going to let that happen. What is your name?" "Emma," she whispered. "Okay. Emma, my name is Adrian. We are going to take your mom to a place where the doctors are very good. I need you to be brave. Can you do that?" Emma nodded, tears spilling over, but she did not let go of his hand. When Marco arrived, he and Thorne carefully lifted the unconscious woman. She was alarmingly light, a fact that made Adrian's jaw tighten even further. They carried her down the 4 flights of stairs, with Adrian walking behind them, holding Emma's hand tightly. The ride to the clinic was silent and fast. Adrian sat in the back of the SUV with Emma, while Thorne and Marco tended to the woman in the 3rd row of seats. Emma sat rigid, staring at her mother's pale face. Adrian unbuttoned his cashmere overcoat and draped it over the girl's shoulders. She was drowning in the fabric, but she pulled it tight, inhaling the scent of his cologne and tobacco. "We are almost there," Adrian told her quietly. The clinic was a sleek, modern building usually reserved for elective surgeries and wealthy clients who preferred discretion. When the automatic doors slid open and Adrian Valenti walked in, carrying a sleeping child and flanked by a doctor pushing a gurney, the reception area went dead silent. The night nurse, a woman named Janice who knew exactly who signed her paychecks, stood up so quickly her chair rolled back and hit the wall. "Mr. Valenti," she stammered. We weren't expecting you. Prepare room 304, Adrian barked, striding past the desk without slowing down. "Get the monitors running. I want a full saline drip and a nutrient panel." "But sir, the paperwork," Janice began. Adrian stopped and turned his head slowly to look at her. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Do I look like I care about paperwork right now?" Janice swallowed hard and shook her head. "No, sir." Right away, they whisked the woman, Claire. He had learned her name from the bills on the table, into a private room. Thorne went to work, hooking her up to machines that beeped with a rhythmic, reassuring cadence. Adrian stood in the hallway for a moment, watching through the glass. He felt a small hand slip into his again. Emma was standing there, still wearing his giant coat. "You can go in," Adrian said softly. "She is safe now." Emma walked into the room and climbed onto the chair beside the hospital bed. She curled her legs up, resting her head near her mother's hand, her eyes heavy with exhaustion now that the adrenaline was fading. Adrian walked in behind her and sat in the armchair in the corner, keeping a vigil. Hours passed. The clinic settled into a hush. Adrian sat in the semi-darkness, watching the rise and fall of Claire Dawson's chest. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor was a hypnotic sound. Emma had fallen asleep in the chair, her body twisted in an uncomfortable angle, without a sound. Adrian stood up. He picked Emma up, marveling again at how small she was, and sat back down in the armchair, settling her onto his lap. She sighed in her sleep, her head finding the crook of his neck, her breathing evening out. He looked down at the two of them, the mother broken by the weight of the world, and the daughter who had been forced to be the adult. A memory washed over him, sharp and acidic. He was 10 years old. His mother was coughing in the bedroom of a cold apartment in Brooklyn. He remembered running to the neighbors, banging on doors, begging for help. They had closed their doors. They didn't want trouble. He remembered the feeling of total, suffocating powerlessness. He remembered promising himself, over her grave 2 days later, that he would never be powerless again. He looked at Claire's face. She had fought hard, the calluses on her fingertips, the dark circles under her eyes, the cheap shoes. She was fighting a war against poverty, and she was losing. Adrian reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He typed a message to his personal accountant. "I am sending you a social security number and a name. Claire Dawson, find every debt she has. Credit cards, medical bills, back rent, utilities, pay them all. Tonight, I want her balance at 0 by sunrise." The reply came back 2 minutes later. "Done. How do you want this categorized?" Adrian typed, "Anonymous donation, make sure it cannot be traced back to the organization." He put the phone away and leaned his head back against the chair. The little girl shifted in his arms, her small hand clutching the lapel of his suit. For the first time in years, the silence in the room didn't feel lonely. It felt heavy with purpose. It was nearly 6 a.m. when Claire Dawson stirred. The first thing she noticed was the smell. It didn't smell like her apartment. It smelled of lavender and antiseptic. The second thing she noticed was the warmth. She was under a heavy, soft duvet. Her eyes fluttered open. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of medical equipment. Confusion clouded her mind. She tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness pushed her back down. "Emma," she rasped, her voice dry and cracked. She turned her head to the side and froze. There was a man sitting in the corner of the room. He was wearing a dark suit that looked more expensive than everything she owned combined. He was asleep, his head resting against the back of the chair and curled up on his lap, fast asleep with her thumb near her mouth, was Emma. Panic spiked in Claire's chest. She scrambled up, ignoring the IV line tugging at her arm. "Emma!" she cried out, her voice sharp with fear. The man's eyes snapped open instantly. There was no grogginess, no moment of disorientation. He was awake and alert in a split second. He looked at her, his eyes dark and intense, rimmed with the fatigue of a long night. He raised a hand slowly, palm out, a gesture of peace. "Quiet," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "She finally fell asleep an hour ago." Claire stared at him, her heart hammering against her ribs. She pulled the sheet up to her chin, her mind racing. "Who is this man? Why is my daughter on his lap? Where am I? Who are you?" Claire demanded, her voice shaking. "Where are we?" "We are at a clinic," the man said softly. He shifted carefully, trying not to wake the child. "You collapsed at your apartment, your daughter. She came to find help. She found me." Claire blinked. The memories of the previous night hazy and fragmented. She remembered the dizziness, the floor rushing up to meet her, the sound of Emma screaming. "You brought me here?" Claire asked. "I did." Claire looked around the room again, the private monitors, the leather armchair, the view of the city skyline through the window. This wasn't the county hospital. "I can't afford this," she whispered, the fear of money overriding the fear of the stranger for a brief moment. "I don't have insurance that covers." "Whatever this is, it is taken care of," the man said. Claire looked back at him. He was handsome in a terrifying, jagged kind of way. He had the face of a man who had seen too much, with a jaw that looked like it was carved from granite, but the way his hand rested protectively on Emma's back was gentle. "Who are you?" she asked again. He hesitated. He could tell her the truth, that he was Adrian Valenti, the man the newspapers called a crime lord, the man the district attorney wanted behind bars. He could tell her that he owned the building they were in and half the block surrounding it. But he looked at Emma, sleeping peacefully against his chest, and then at Claire's terrified, exhausted eyes. "I'm Adrian," he said simply, "just the guy your daughter grabbed on the street." Claire studied him. She knew she should be afraid. Every instinct she had honed as a single mother told her that men like this did not do favors for free. Men like this were dangerous. But then Emma stirred. The little girl opened her eyes, saw her mother awake, and scrambled off Adrian's lap. "Mommy!" Emma cried, rushing to the bed. Claire caught her daughter, pulling her close, burying her face in the girl's hair. She looked over Emma's shoulder at Adrian. He had stood up, smoothing out his suit jacket, his expression unreadable once more. "Thank you," Claire said, the words tasting strange. Adrian nodded once. "Get some rest." Claire. "We can talk about the rest later." He turned to leave, but before he reached the door, Emma called out, "Adrian!" He stopped, his hand on the door handle. He looked back. "Are you coming back?" Emma asked. For a moment, the room was silent. Adrian looked at the two of them, a fragile, broken little unit that had somehow snagged onto his life. "Yeah," Adrian said, his voice dropping to a murmur. "I'm not going anywhere." He stepped out into the hallway, closing the door softly behind him, leaving the two of them safe in the warmth he had provided. 3 days later, Claire Dawson walked out of the sliding glass doors of the private clinic and into the biting chill of the Harborview afternoon. The air smelled of exhaust and oncoming snow. In her hand, she clutched a thick envelope of discharge papers and a receipt that made no sense. She stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, staring at the paper again. The total amount due was listed in the thousands, a number that would have taken her 5 years to pay off, but at the bottom, stamped in bold black ink, were the words, "Paid in full." Claire felt a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with her recent exhaustion. She did not like debts. She did not like charity. In her experience, charity always came with a hook, a hidden cost that she would be forced to pay later when she was least expecting it. A black sedan was idling at the curb. The window rolled down, and Adrian Valenti looked out from the driver's seat. He was wearing dark sunglasses, though the sun was barely breaking through the gray clouds. "Get in," Adrian said. "I will drive you home." Claire marched up to the window, her spine stiff, her jaw set. She slapped the receipt against the metal of the car door. "I did not ask you to do this," she said, her voice sharp. "I cannot pay you back. I have $40 in my bank account. Adrian, you cannot just pay a bill like this and expect nothing. What do you want?" Adrian took off his sunglasses. His eyes were dark, unreadable, and tired. He looked at her, really looked at her, taking in the way she held herself, like a cornered animal ready to bite. "Get in the car. Claire, you are shivering. I'm not getting in until you tell me what the catch is," she insisted, though her teeth were indeed starting to chatter. Adrian sighed, turned off the engine, and stepped out of the car. He towered over her, blocking the wind. He did not move into her space. He just stood there, solid and immovable. "There is no catch," he said quietly. "You needed help. I had the means. It is that simple." "It is never that simple," Claire shot back. "Men like you don't just give things away." "Men like me?" Adrian repeated, a dangerous edge slipping into his voice. "And who exactly do you think I am?" Claire hesitated. She remembered the way the clinic staff had looked at him, with fear. She remembered the expensive suit, the driver, the way he carried himself like he owned the pavement he stood on. "I think you are someone who is used to getting what he wants," Claire said, "and I am telling you, I am not for sale." Adrian stared at her for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, the corner of his mouth twitched upward. It wasn't a smile, exactly, but it was close. "You are right," he said. "I am a businessman. I don't like losing money, so let's make a deal." Claire crossed her arms, clutching her purse tight against her chest. "What kind of deal?" "I noticed your bag," Adrian said, gesturing to the worn leather tote slung over her shoulder. "Inside, you have an intermediate accounting textbook and a ledger. You are organized. You track every penny. So, I own a restaurant downtown, Valenti Bistro. My current bookkeeper is stealing from me, or he is incompetent. I haven't decided which yet, but he is fired either way. I need someone to handle the books, manage the front office, and organize the inventory." Claire blinked. She had expected him to ask for something personal, something sleazy. This was mundane. "You want me to work for you?" "I want you to work off the debt," Adrian corrected smoothly. $20 an hour. Flexible shifts so you can pick up Emma from school. You fix my office mess, and we call the medical bill a signing bonus. Claire narrowed her eyes. She looked for the lie on his face, but he was a wall of calm control. She thought about the eviction notice sitting on her kitchen counter. She thought about the empty refrigerator. She thought about Emma, who was currently at school waiting for a mother who could barely keep the lights on. "Strict boundaries," Claire said, her voice wavering only slightly. "I do my work. I get paid and I go home. That is it. That is it," Adrian agreed. "And I can bring Emma if I have to. I can't afford a sitter." "There is a booth in the back corner near my office," Adrian said. "She can do her homework there. I will even throw in dinner for her." Claire took a deep breath. The wind bit at her cheeks. She knew this was dangerous. Her gut told her that Adrian Valenti was walking trouble. But for the first time in months, someone was offering her a lifeline, not an anchor. "Fine," she said. Adrian opened the passenger door. "Good. Start Monday." Valenti Bistro was an establishment of dark wood, low lighting, and heavy velvet curtains. It was the kind of place where deals were made in whispers over bottles of wine that cost more than Claire's monthly rent. Claire sat in the small glass-walled office at the back of the restaurant, surrounded by stacks of invoices. She had been working there for 3 weeks, true to his word. Adrian had kept his distance. He was there every night, moving through the dining room like a shark in dark water, shaking hands, pouring wine, watching everything. But he watched her too. Claire felt his gaze often. When she was counting cash at the safe, she would look up and catch him staring from the bar, his expression unreadable. Whenever their eyes met, he would nod once and look away. It was unnerving. It was also, confusingly, the safest she had felt in years. Emma loved it, the bistro staff, a collection of men with broken noses and thick necks who looked like they moonlighted as bouncers, had turned into absolute puddles around the 7-year-old. The head chef, a man named Marco who terrified the line cooks, made Emma special grilled cheese sandwiches cut into the shapes of stars. One Tuesday evening, the restaurant was quiet. Claire was filing receipts when she saw movement near the back booth where Emma was coloring. Adrian was sitting across from her daughter. Claire froze, her hand hovering over the stapler. She watched through the glass. Adrian, the man who terrified seasoned criminals, was holding a pink crayon. He looked utterly out of place in his 3-piece suit, sitting at the small table. Emma was talking animatedly, pointing at her drawing. Adrian was listening with an intensity usually reserved for life or death negotiations. He nodded seriously, said something that made Emma giggle, and then added a stroke of pink to the paper. Claire felt a strange tightness in her chest. She looked away, forcing herself to focus on the numbers in front of her. "Don't look," she told herself. "He is your boss." "He is dangerous. Don't look." But she looked. Later that night, the restaurant had officially closed, the staff had left, and only the kitchen crew remained in the back cleaning up. Claire was gathering her things. Exhausted, Emma was asleep on the office sofa, covered by a spare tablecloth. "I will take the trash out," Claire called out to the empty room. Grabbing a bin of broken glass from the bar area, she was rushing. That was her mistake. She lifted the heavy bin, and a jagged stem of a broken wine glass shifted. It sliced clean across her palm. Claire gasped, dropping the bin with a crash. Pain seared through her hand, hot and sharp. She grabbed her wrist, blood instantly welling up and dripping onto the polished floor. "Damn it," she hissed, tears springing to her eyes before she could even take a step toward the sink. The door to the main office swung open. Adrian was there. He crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides. "Let me see," he demanded. "I'm fine," Claire stammered, backing away, clutching her bleeding hand against her chest. I was clumsy." Adrian didn't listen. He reached out and took her wrist. His grip was firm but incredibly gentle. He pulled her hand away from her chest, inspecting the cut. His face was grim. "It is deep," he murmured. "Come with me." He led her into his office, guiding her to the leather chair behind his massive mahogany desk. He didn't ask her to sit. He just moved her there, and she found herself obeying. The room smelled of expensive tobacco, leather, and something spicy, like sandalwood. It smelled like him. Adrian pulled a first aid kit from a drawer. It wasn't a standard plastic box. It was a professional-grade trauma kit. He snapped on a pair of black nitrile gloves and opened a packet of antiseptic. "This is going to sting," he warned, his voice low. He looked up at her then. His eyes were the color of obsidian, dark and reflecting the desk lamp's golden light. "I can do it," Claire whispered, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "Let me," he said. He cleaned the wound with precise, practiced movements. He didn't flinch at the blood. He handled her hand as if it were made of porcelain, his large thumb brushing over her knuckles to steady her. Claire watched him. She watched the way his eyelashes cast shadows on his cheekbones. She watched the concentration in his furrowed brow. She felt the heat radiating from him, a physical weight in the small room. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, the words slipping out before she could stop them. This isn't in the job description." Adrian paused. He was wrapping a strip of gauze around her palm now. He didn't look up, but his hand stilled for a fraction of a second. "I don't like seeing things broken," he said quietly. "Especially not things I care about." The air in the room suddenly felt thick, heavy with unspoken things. Claire's breath caught in her throat. Things he cared about? Was she a thing he cared about? She tried to laugh, but it came out as a nervous, breathless sound. "I am not a Vess. Adrian, you don't have to fix me." He finished tying the bandage and peeled off the gloves, tossing them into the trash. Then he leaned back against the edge of the desk, crossing his ankles. He was close. Too close. His legs were inches from hers. "No," he said, his gaze locking onto hers. "You are not a vase. You are much tougher than that." He reached out, and for a heart-stopping second, she thought he was going to touch her face. Instead, he brushed a stray lock of hair away from her forehead. His knuckles grazed her skin, leaving a trail of fire. "Go home, Claire," he said softly. "Your hand needs to rest." Claire stood up, her legs feeling shaky. She grabbed her bag, woke a groggy Emma, and practically fled the restaurant, her bandaged hand burning, her heart racing faster than it had in years. 2 nights later, the atmosphere in the bistro shifted. It was Friday, the busiest night of the week. The dining room was packed. Claire was helping at the host stand because the usual hostess had called in sick. She was checking reservations when 2 men in expensive but ill-fitting suits stumbled up to the podium. They smelled of scotch and arrogance. "Hey, sweetheart," the taller one slurred, leaning heavily on the stand. "We don't have a reservation, but I bet you can squeeze us in. Maybe a private booth, or maybe just you and me in the back?" Claire forced a polite smile. Stepping back, "I am sorry, sir. We are fully booked tonight. The wait time is 2 hours. 2 hours, the man scoffed. He reached out and grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her bicep. "Come on, look at me. Do you know who I am? You can do better than that." "Please let go of me," Claire said, her voice dropping, ice entering her tone. "Don't be a bitch," the man sneered, tightening his grip. "I'm just asking for a table." Suddenly, the noise of the restaurant seemed to vanish for the man. A shadow fell over him. Adrian appeared from nowhere. He didn't shout. He didn't make a scene. He simply stepped between Claire and the man, moving with a fluid, lethal grace. He placed one hand on the man's chest, right over his tie. "Is there a problem here?" Adrian asked. His voice was terrifyingly soft. It was the voice of a man who was deciding exactly how to dismantle the person in front of him. The drunk man blinked, looking up at Adrian. The height difference wasn't huge, but the presence difference was monumental. Adrian looked like a wolf facing down a golden retriever. "She's being rude," the drunk man muttered, though he released Claire's arm instantly. "She is doing her job," Adrian said, "and you are touching my staff." Adrian leaned in closer. He lowered his head so his mouth was inches from the man's ear. Claire couldn't hear exactly what he whispered, but she saw the color drain completely from the man's face. The man's eyes went wide, terror replacing the drunkenness in a split second. We were just leaving," the man stammered. "That is a wise choice," Adrian said, stepping back. "Don't come back." The 2 men practically ran out the front door. The restaurant returned to normal conversation, most people unaware that violence had just been narrowly avoided. Adrian turned to Claire. His eyes were scanning her, checking for damage. "Did he hurt you?" he asked, his voice tight. Claire rubbed her arm. "No, I'm fine." Adrian's jaw was clenched so hard a muscle feathered in his cheek. "Go take a break. I will handle the front. I don't need a break. Adrian, go." "Take 5 minutes." It wasn't a request. Claire walked out the back door into the alleyway, needing the cold air to clear her head. Her hands were shaking. It wasn't just the men. It was Adrian. The violence rolling off him in waves had been palpable. It terrified her. And yet, the fact that it was directed at someone else, for her, that terrified her even more. The heavy metal door opened behind her. Adrian stepped out. Claire spun around. "You didn't have to do that," she snapped, the adrenaline making her voice sharp. "You practically threatened to kill him right there in the lobby. You scared them to death. They put their hands on you," Adrian said. He walked toward her, the gravel crunching under his dress shoes. "I could have handled it," Claire argued, backing up until her shoulder blades hit the rough brick wall of the building. "You overreacted. You act like a mobster." Adrian stopped. He was standing right in front of her now, crowding her space, boxing her in against the wall. He placed one hand on the bricks beside her head. He didn't touch her, but his arm created a barrier, a cage of expensive wool and raw heat. "I don't tolerate disrespect," Adrian said, his voice dropping to a rough growl. "And I don't tolerate people touching what is under my roof." Claire looked up at him. His face was half in shadow, illuminated only by the distant street lamp. He looked wild, intense, and completely captivating. "You scared me," Claire whispered, the fight draining out of her. Adrian's expression softened instantly. The anger vanished, replaced by regret. He stepped half an inch closer, his body heat wrapping around her against the freezing night air. "I am sorry," he murmured. "I never want you to be afraid of me, Claire. Never." His eyes dropped to her lips, then back up to her eyes. The silence in the alley stretched, heavy and electric. Claire felt her breath hitch. She should push him away. She should tell him to back off. She should run. But she didn't move. She felt the warmth of his breath on her cheek. She saw the way his pupils were blown wide. Her back was pressed against the cold brick, but her front was burning from his proximity. Her breathing synced with his. Inhale, exhale, slow and deep. Adrian began to lean in. His movement was agonizingly slow, giving her every chance to stop him. His head tilted. Claire's lips parted slightly. A shiver that had nothing to do with the cold raced down her spine. She wanted this. God help her. She wanted this dangerous man to close the gap. "Mom?" The voice shattered the moment like glass. Claire and Adrian sprang apart as if they had been burned. Emma was standing in the open doorway of the restaurant, holding her backpack. "Mom, are we going home soon?" "I finished my math." Claire pressed a hand to her chest, trying to calm her racing heart. She looked at Adrian. He had stepped back into the shadows, his hands in his pockets, his face turned away. But she could see the tension in his shoulders. He looked like a man in pain. "Yes, baby," Claire managed to say, her voice sounding breathless and strange to her own ears. "Yes, we're going home right now." Adrian didn't look at her as she walked past him to get to her daughter. But as she ushered Emma inside, she heard him let out a long, shaky breath in the darkness of the alley. Winter settled over Harborview with a gray persistence, the days growing shorter and the shadows stretching longer across the cobblestone streets. Inside the walls of Valenti Bistro, however, the atmosphere had shifted into something warmer, something that felt dangerously like domesticity. Over the course of 6 weeks, a routine had calcified between the glass walls of Adrian Valenti's office. It was a rhythm that the restaurant staff watched with a mixture of confusion and awe. Emma sat at the small designated corner of Adrian's massive mahogany desk. Her legs swung back and forth, her sneakers bumping rhythmically against the expensive wood. She was biting her lip in concentration. A worksheet of second-grade subtraction problems spread out before her. Adrian sat opposite her, reviewing supplier contracts for the upcoming holiday season. The bistro was closed for the afternoon lull, the silence broken only by the hum of the refrigerator units and the scratch of Emma's pencil. "Adrian?" Emma asked, not looking up. "Yes, Emma." "Why do you write your name like that?" Adrian paused, his fountain pen hovering over a signature line. "Like what? Like a spider dipped in ink and then had a seizure," she said matter-of-factly. "From the doorway, Marco." Adrian's driver and bodyguard choked on a laugh, turning it into a cough at the last second. Adrian looked up slowly. He looked at his signature, a sharp, jagged scrawl that was indeed indecipherable. And then he looked at the 7-year-old girl who was currently erasing a hole through her paper. "It is efficient," Adrian said, his voice dry. "It saves time." "It looks angry," Emma countered. "Blowing eraser shavings off the desk, you should make the A rounder. Like a bubble, it would make people less scared of you." Adrian leaned back in his leather chair. The terrifying stillness that usually made grown men sweat seemed to evaporate. A genuine amusement crinkled the corners of his dark eyes. "And who is scared of me?" he asked. "Everyone," Emma said, finally looking up with innocent blue eyes. "The pasta chef shakes when you walk by. I saw him drop a spoon yesterday." Adrian let out a sound that stopped Marco dead in his tracks. It was a laugh. It was low, rusty, and short, but it was undeniable. The sound seemed to startle even Adrian himself. "I will take your advice under advisement," Adrian said, the ghost of a smile lingering on his face. "Now finish your math." From her desk outside the glass partition, Claire watched the interaction. She felt a familiar tug in her chest, a combination of warmth and warning. She had started to see the cracks in Adrian's armor, the man beneath the tailored suits and the icy reputation. She saw it in the way he handled them. every night when her shift ended. Adrian no longer just said goodnight. He walked them to her beat-up sedan. He stood on the curb, hands in his pockets, his eyes scanning the dark parking lot, the street, the rooftops. He waited until she had the engine running and the doors locked before he turned back to the restaurant. She saw it in her apartment building. 2. For 3 years, the hallway light on the second floor had been broken. The front door lock had been finicky, requiring a special jiggle to open. 2 weeks ago, Claire had come home to find the hallway blazing with new LED fixtures. The front door now sported a heavy-duty deadbolt that looked like it belonged on a bank vault. When she had asked the landlord, a slumlord who usually ignored her calls, he had just shrugged and muttered something about routine property maintenance. But Claire had seen the invoice sticking out of his clipboard. It didn't have the landlord's letterhead. It had a construction company logo she had seen on a file in Adrian's office. She hadn't said anything. She was too afraid that if she acknowledged it, the bubble would burst. But bubbles are fragile things, and the real world has sharp edges. It was a Tuesday night when the weather turned violent. A storm battered the coast, turning the streets of Harborview into rivers of black sludge. The wind howled against the brickwork of the bistro, rattling the panes of glass. Claire was late. She was never late. Adrian was standing by the host podium, checking his watch for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. His face was a mask of irritation. But Marco knew better. It wasn't irritation, it was worry. The front door burst open. The wind grabbed the heavy oak door and slammed it against the wall with a crack that silenced the dining room. Claire stumbled in. She was soaked to the bone. Her hair was plastered to her face, water dripping from the hem of her coat onto the floor. But it was not the rain that made Adrian's blood turn to ice. It was her face. She was pale, ghostly white, and she was shaking so violently she could barely stand. Adrian moved. He didn't walk. He closed the distance between them with a predatory speed that startled the diners. "Claire?" She looked up at him, her eyes wide and glassy. She looked like she was in shock. I'm sorry I'm late," she stammered, her teeth chattering. "The bus. I missed the bus." Adrian ignored the apology. He took her arm, feeling the tremors running through her body. Her sleeve was soaking wet, freezing cold. "Marco, cover the floor," Adrian barked over his shoulder. He didn't give Claire a choice. He guided her firmly through the restaurant, past the curious eyes of the customers, and straight into his office. He shut the door and locked it, cutting off the noise of the outside world. "Sit," he commanded, pointing to the leather couch. Claire sat, huddled in on herself. She looked small, broken. Adrian stripped off his suit jacket and threw it aside. He went to the small private bathroom attached to his office and came back with a thick, clean towel. He knelt in front of her. "Dry your hair," he said, his voice tight. Claire took the towel, but her hands were shaking too hard to use it effectively. With a rough sigh, Adrian took it back. He draped the towel over her head and began to rub her hair dry himself. His movements were vigorous but careful, like he was trying to rub the warmth back into her blood. "Tell me what happened," Adrian said, "and do not lie to me. Claire, this is not just rain." Claire squeezed her eyes shut. "The dam broke." "He was there," she whispered. "Who?" "Tyler." Adrian's hands stilled on the towel. He knew the name, the ex-boyfriend, the father who had never paid a dime of child support, the man who was the reason Claire flinched when people moved too fast. He was at the apartment, Claire said, her voice trembling. He was waiting in the hallway. He wanted money. He said he has debts. He said he knows I'm working now. "Did he touch you?" Adrian asked. His voice was terrifyingly calm, a flat, dead calm. "He grabbed my arm," Claire said, a tear slipping out. "I pulled away. I ran, but he yelled after me. He said if I didn't give him $5,000 by Friday, he would go to court. He said he would tell them I'm an unfit mother. He said he would take Emma." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Adrian stood up. He walked over to his desk and gripped the edge of it. His knuckles turned white. The rage that surged through him was black and ancient. The thought of a man threatening a woman was bad enough. The thought of this man, this waste of space, threatening to take Emma, the little girl who told him to make his A's rounder, made him want to burn the city down. "He won't take her," Adrian said, his back to Claire. "He has rights," Claire sobbed, the fear finally pouring out of her. "He is her father on the birth certificate. I can't afford a lawyer. Adrian, I can't fight him. If he takes her, I will die. I will just die." Adrian turned around. He walked back to the couch and sat down next to her. He picked up his dry suit jacket from where he had thrown it and draped it over her shoulders. The wool was heavy and warm, still holding his body heat. Claire looked at him, her eyes red-rimmed and desperate. "I am so tired. Adrian," she confessed, her voice cracking, "I am so tired of being scared. I am tired of surviving. I am tired of men who think they can just take whatever they want because they are stronger." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and a flicker of fear crossed her face. "Are you one of them?" she whispered. "Are you just waiting to take something too?" The question hung in the air, raw and honest. Adrian looked at her. He saw the exhaustion etched into her beautiful face. He saw the strength it took for her to just get out of bed every morning. He felt a pull in his chest that terrified him more than any gun pointed at his head. He shifted on the couch, turning his body toward hers. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with the storm outside and the silence inside. "I am a man who takes what he wants," Adrian admitted, his voice low and rough. "I have done things, Claire, things that would make you run from this room if you knew the details." Claire flinched, pulling back slightly, but Adrian continued, leaning forward, closing the distance between them. "I would never take from you, and I would never, ever let anyone hurt you or Emma." He reached out. He gave her 3 seconds to pull away, 3 seconds to tell him to stop. She didn't move. She just watched him, her breath hitching in her throat. His hand cupped her face. His thumb brushed against her cheekbone, wiping away a stray tear. His skin was rough, calloused from years of violence, but his touch was feather-light. "You are safe with me," he murmured, his eyes dropping to her mouth. The tension that had been building for weeks, the stolen glances, the accidental touches, the silent energy, it all snapped. Claire made a small, wounded sound in her throat. It wasn't a protest, it was a plea. Adrian leaned in and kissed her. It started tentatively, a question asked in the space between 2 heartbeats. His lips were firm and warm against hers. He tasted like coffee and restraint. But when Claire didn't pull away, when she sighed and leaned into him, the kiss deepened. It changed from a question to a declaration. Adrian groaned low in his throat. He tilted her head back, his mouth moving over hers with a hunger that he had been suppressing since the night at the clinic. It was possessive. It was desperate. Claire's hands came up, clutching the lapels of his shirt, pulling him closer. The fear that usually paralyzed her was burning away, replaced by a fire she hadn't felt in years. She felt the solid weight of him, the wall of muscle and heat that blocked out the cold world for the first time in forever. She didn't feel like she was fighting alone. She felt anchored. Adrian's other hand moved to the small of her back, pressing her against him. He was careful, so careful, treating her like she was made of glass even as he devoured her. They shifted. Claire found herself backing up, her legs hitting the cushions of the couch, and Adrian followed her. The movement was fluid, a dance of gravity. He loomed over her, blocking out the light, his body pressing her down into the leather. The kiss grew urgent. Mouths open, breath mingling, a frantic clash of teeth and tongues. Claire's fingers tangled in the hair at the nape of his neck. She felt the tension in his shoulders, the coiled power he was holding back. He wanted to crush her to him. She could feel it, but he was restraining himself, his muscles trembling with the effort to be gentle. His hand slid from her waist to her hip, his thumb digging in slightly, grounding her. The heat of his palm burned through her damp skirt. Claire felt a surge of desire so strong it made her dizzy. She wanted him closer, She wanted to forget Tyler, the bills, the fear. She wanted to lose herself in this man who made the world stop. But then, his leg brushed against hers, heavy and demanding, and a cold spike of panic pierced the haze, the loss of control, the speed, the intensity. It felt too good. And in Claire's life, things that felt this good always ended in disaster. She thought of Emma. She thought of the instability of bringing a man into their lives, a dangerous man. She thought of another broken promise, another father figure disappearing in the night. "Stop!" she gasped, tearing her mouth away from his. Adrian froze instantly. Claire pushed at his chest. Her breathing was ragged, her lips swollen and red. "I can't," she whispered, panic rising in her voice. "I can't do this." Adrian pulled back. He didn't argue. He didn't try to persuade her. He respected the boundary the second she said it. He sat up, running a hand through his hair, his chest heaving as he tried to regulate his own breathing. "I'm sorry," Claire said, pulling the oversized jacket tighter around herself. I'm not ready, Emma. She needs stability. She needs to know that we are safe. I can't bring us, into her life if it's just going to break." She looked at him, terrified that he would be angry. Terrified that the rejection would turn him back into the cold boss she had met weeks ago. Adrian looked at her. His eyes were dark with arousal, his pupils blown wide, but there was no anger in them. There was only frustration and a strange, deep sadness. He reached out and took her hand, squeezing it once before letting go. "You don't have to apologize," he said, his voice rough. He stood up and walked to the other side of the room, putting distance between them to let the air clear. He poured a glass of water from a pitcher on the sidebar and drank it in one long swallow. He turned back to her. "I am not going anywhere, Claire. I am not Tyler. I don't run when things get difficult." He looked her dead in the eye, his expression solemn. "I will wait," he said, "as long as it takes for you to trust this, as long as it takes for you to be ready." Claire looked at him, her heart aching. She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to believe him. The next morning, the sun broke through the clouds, bathing Harborview in a deceptively cheerful light. The storm had passed, leaving the streets washed clean. Claire arrived at the bistro early. She felt lighter. The conversation with Adrian, the kiss, the promise. It sat in her chest like a warm ember. Maybe, she thought, just maybe, things were going to be okay. She walked into the break room to put her purse away. Sarah, one of the waitresses, was sitting at the small table, scrolling through a tablet. Sarah looked up, her face pale. "Claire," Sarah said, her voice strained. "Have you seen the news?" "No," Claire said, frowning. "I don't check my phone in the mornings." "Why?" Sarah turned the tablet around and slid it across the table. Claire looked down. The blood drained from her face so fast she felt dizzy. It was the local news website. The headline was in bold, black letters. "Local businessmen linked to organized crime syndicate." Underneath the headline was a photo. It was a grainy telephoto lens shot, but it was unmistakable. It was Adrian. He was standing in an alleyway, talking to a man Claire didn't recognize, a man who looked rough, dangerous, and very much like a criminal. The sub-headline read, "Adrian Valenti, owner of Valenti Bistro, suspected of heading the notorious Valenti crime family. Law enforcement sources cite money laundering and racketeering allegations." Claire stared at the word, Mafia. It wasn't a rumor anymore. It wasn't just a feeling she got when he intimidated drunk customers. It was black and white text. She thought of the men lurking in shadows. She thought of the property maintenance that happened overnight. She thought of Tyler's threat and Adrian's calm, lethal promise that he wouldn't take Emma. "I am a man who takes what he wants." The warm ember in her chest turned into a cold, hard stone. She wasn't building a life with a savior. She was building a life with a monster. And she had let him hold her daughter. Claire looked up at the glass wall of the office across the restaurant. Adrian was there, on the phone, his back to her. He looked powerful. He looked commanding. He looked guilty. Claire grabbed her purse. her hands shaking uncontrollably. The safety she had felt 12 hours ago shattered into 1,000 pieces. The sound of the paper slamming against the mahogany desk echoed like a gunshot in the quiet office. Adrian Valenti did not flinch. He sat behind his desk, his hands folded calmly over a stack of invoices, his face a mask of stone. He looked at the crumpled printout Claire had shoved toward him, then slowly lifted his gaze to meet hers. Claire was shaking. It was not the cold tremor of the rain from the week before. This was a vibration born of pure, molten anger. Her eyes were red-rimmed, betraying that she had been crying in the employee restroom before marching in here. "Is it true?" she demanded, her voice cracking. "Do not lie to me, Adrian. Do not give me the property manager speech. Is this who you are?" Adrian looked at the photo on the paper. It was blurry, taken with a long-range lens, showing him shaking hands with a man known for union extortion. The headline screamed, "Organized crime," in bold black letters. He could lie. He could spin a story about misunderstandings, about silent investors, about how the press loved to tear down successful men from the old neighborhood. He had spun those lies 1,000 times to police captains, city councilmen, and dates. But looking at Claire, seeing the betrayal etched into the lines of her face, the lie died in his throat. "Yes," Adrian said. The single word hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Claire let out a sharp breath, reeling back as if he had struck her. She grabbed the edge of the desk to steady herself. "You are a criminal," she whispered, "a mobster." "I am the head of the Valenti family," Adrian corrected, his voice low and steady. "I run numbers. I manage protection for businesses that the police ignore. I oversee imports at the docks." "You hurt people," Claire said, her voice rising. "You kill people." Adrian stood up. He moved slowly, deliberately keeping his hands visible. "I protect my own." "Claire." "You are a monster," she cried out, the tears finally spilling over. "You let me bring my daughter here. You let her sit at that desk. You let her draw pictures with you while you were... What? Planning a hit? Laundering money?" Adrian's jaw tightened. A flash of pain crossed his eyes, gone as quickly as it appeared. "I have rules," he said, his voice hardening. "We do not touch drugs. We do not touch human trafficking. And we never, under any circumstances, involve children. I have spent the last 10 years trying to steer this ship into legitimate waters. This bistro, the real estate, the construction firms. They are real. I am trying to build something clean." "But the foundation is blood, isn't it?" Claire challenged, staring him down. "You can't wash that off. Adrian, it doesn't matter how many medical bills you pay or how many nice dinners you buy." She backed away from the desk, clutching her purse to her chest as if it were a shield. "I can't do this," she said. "I can't be here. I can't let Emma be anywhere near this." "Claire," Adrian started, stepping around the desk. "Stay back," she shouted. He froze. "I am quitting," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "I am taking Emma, and we are leaving. Do not come after us. Do not check on us. I don't want your money. I don't want your protection. I just want you to stay away." Adrian watched her. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to stop her, to explain that she was safer with him than without him, that the world was dangerous and he was the only shield she had. But he looked at the terror in her eyes, terror of him, and he knew he had lost. "Okay," he said softly. Claire turned and fled. She pushed through the glass door, ignoring the startled looks of the kitchen staff. She grabbed her coat from the break room and marched out the back door into the alley. Emma was waiting in the car, playing with a plastic dinosaur. When Claire got in, slamming the door and fumbling with the keys, Emma looked up. "Mom? Why are you crying? Where is Uncle Adrian? I didn't get to say goodbye. We aren't seeing him anymore." "Emma?" Claire snapped, shifting the car into gear. "But why?" Emma asked, her voice small and hurt. "Because he is a bad man," Claire said, the lie tasting like ash in her mouth. She drove away, watching the bistro disappear in the rearview mirror, inside the office. Adrian stood by the window, watching the taillights fade, his hand resting against the cold glass. He felt a hollowness in his chest that no amount of whiskey would fill. 2 weeks passed. The silence in Claire's apartment was deafening. The frantic energy of working 2 jobs returned, but without the safety net of the bistro, the stress was sharper, crueler. Emma was moody and withdrawn, asking constantly about the restaurant and the nice man who helped her with her math. Claire deflected the questions, her patience fraying. But while Claire was trying to rebuild her walls, the city was watching. Victor Russo sat in the back of a warehouse on the south side of the city. He was a man who enjoyed the cruelty of his profession. Unlike Adrian, who viewed violence as a necessary tool for order, Victor viewed it as a sport. "So," Victor said, twirling a gold ring on his pinky finger, "the Wolf of Harborview has a soft spot?" The informant, a busboy from the bistro who had been bribed with $500, nodded nervously. "Her name is Claire. She quit 2 weeks ago, but before that, they were close. The kid was always there." Victor smiled. It was a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Valenti thinks he is untouchable because he has no family," Victor mused. "He thinks he has nothing to lose, but a man with a broken heart makes mistakes, and a man who is distracted is a man who can be killed. Start the pressure," Victor ordered. "Let's see how much she really means to him." The first crack in Claire's life appeared 3 days later. It was a Tuesday afternoon. There was a knock at the door. Claire, expecting the landlord, opened it to find a woman in a gray suit holding a clipboard. She had the weary, judgmental look of a bureaucrat who had seen too many broken homes. "Claire Dawson?" the woman asked. "Yes, I am Miss Gable from Child Protective Services. We received an anonymous tip regarding the welfare of your daughter, Emma." Claire's blood ran cold. "CPS? What? What tip? May I come in?" The next hour was a nightmare. "Miss..." Gable walked through the small apartment, inspecting the cupboards, the sleeping arrangements, the cleanliness. She asked pointed, invasive questions. "We have reports that you were recently hospitalized for a collapse due to negligence of your own health, Miss," Gable said, marking something on her clipboard, and that the bill, which was substantial, was paid for by a Mr. Adrian Valenti. Claire froze. "That was a loan. I worked for him. Mr. Valenti is a person of interest to the police. Miss Dawson, associating a minor with a known crime figure is considered endangerment. I quit," Claire said, her voice rising in panic. "I don't work there anymore. We haven't seen him in weeks. Miss..." Gable looked at her over the rim of her glasses. "See that? You don't? We will be monitoring this case. If we feel Emma is in an unsafe environment, we will have to intervene." When the woman left, Claire sank onto the floor, pulling her knees to her chest. She couldn't breathe. They were watching her. Because of him. Even gone. He was destroying her life, but the nightmare was only beginning. The following Monday, the autumn air was crisp. Claire was late getting off her shift at the temp agency. She missed the usual bus and had to wait 20 minutes for the next one. By the time she reached the stop near Emma's school, the street was mostly empty. Usually, Emma waited on the bench with the crossing guard. The bench was empty. Claire frowned, checking her watch. It was 4 o'clock. Emma knew to wait. Claire walked to the school entrance. The doors were locked. She ran to the playground. Empty. Panic, cold and sharp, pricked at her skin. She pulled out her phone and called the school office, but it went to voicemail. She called her neighbor, Mrs. Higgins, who sometimes watched Emma. "No, dear, I haven't seen her." Mrs. Higgins said. Claire began to run. She ran the 3 blocks to their apartment, screaming Emma's name. The apartment was empty. The backpack wasn't by the door. She called the police. "Please, my daughter is missing," Claire sobbed into the phone, standing on the sidewalk, her chest heaving. She was supposed to be at the bus stop. The officers arrived 10 minutes later. They were young and looked bored. They took notes. They asked about the father. "Tyler," Claire said, wiping her eyes. "Yes, he threatened to take her a few weeks ago, but he doesn't have a car. He doesn't have money. It is usually a parental dispute." "Ma'am," the officer said, closing his notebook, "we will put out a bulletin, but 90% of the time, the kid is with the other parent." "You don't understand," Claire screamed. "He is unstable. We will look into it. Go home and wait by the phone." Claire watched them drive away. She knew, with a mother's terrifying instinct, that they weren't going to find her fast enough. She stood alone on the darkening street. The wind picked up, blowing a stray newspaper against her leg. Then she remembered. The threat Tyler had made was about court. But the feeling she had now, this silence, this efficiency, this didn't feel like Tyler. Tyler was loud and messy. She remembered the name she had heard Adrian mention once on the phone, a name that he had spoken with venom, Russo. She remembered the CPS worker mentioning unsafe associations. This wasn't Tyler. This was the world she had tried to run from. Claire's hands shook so hard she almost dropped her phone. She scrolled past the police number, past her mom's old number, and pressed the contact she had sworn never to use again. It rang once. Claire? Adrian's voice was instant. He didn't say hello. He sounded alert, as if he had been waiting for the phone to ring for weeks. She's gone, Claire gasped, collapsing onto her knees on the pavement. Adrian, Emma is gone. There was a silence on the other end, a silence so profound it felt like the air had been sucked out of the world. Where? Adrian asked. His voice had changed. The warmth was gone. The humanity was gone. It was the voice of a weapon. The school bus stop. The police think it's Tyler, but I don't think it's him. Adrian, I'm so scared. Stay where you are, Adrian commanded. Do not move. Marco is 2 minutes away. How is Marco 2 minutes away? I never stopped watching you. Claire. Before she could process the invasion of privacy, the line went dead. Adrian Valenti stood in the center of his office. He didn't slam the phone down. He set it on the desk with precise, terrifying care. He looked at his lieutenant. A man named Sal. It is Russo, Adrian said. Sal went pale. You think he took the kid? I know he took the kid. Tyler is a drunk who can barely tie his shoes. Russo has been tracking Claire for weeks. He waited until she was isolated. Adrian walked to the safe in the wall. He spun the dial and pulled out a heavy, black pistol. He checked the magazine. The metallic click-clack of the slide, the only sound in the room. Lock it down, Adrian said. Sir? Lock down the city. Sal, call everyone. The docks, the unions, the street crews. No one moves product. No one opens a register. Every single set of eyes on the street is looking for a gray van or a black sedan leaving the school district. I want license plates. I want traffic camera footage. If Victor Russo tries to sneeze in this city, I want to know about it. Adrian holstered the weapon. His eyes were dead. And get the car. I am going to get my family back. The warehouse smelled of rust and seawater. It was located on the far edge of the industrial district, a place where the streetlights had been shot out years ago. In a small office raised above the warehouse floor, Emma sat on a dirty mattress. She wasn't tied up. Victor Russo was cruel, but he wasn't stupid. Marks on a kid brought too much heat. She was hugging her knees, her face streaked with tears. She was terrified, but she was quiet. Victor stood near the door, holding a camera. Say hello to your friend Adrian, Victor said, grinning. I want my mom, Emma whispered. Victor laughed. Tell him to come get you. Tell him to bring the keys to the kingdom. He stopped recording and sent the file. Claire was pacing the floor of the safe house. It was a nondescript apartment in the suburbs, with steel-reinforced doors and blackout curtains. Marco stood by the door, his arms crossed, his face grim, the lock tumbled. Claire spun around. Adrian walked in. He looked like he had aged 10 years in 2 hours. He was wearing a tactical vest over his dress shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal the tattoos on his forearms. He carried an energy that was radioactive. Adrian, Claire ran to him. She grabbed his vest, pulling him close. Did you find her? Is she okay? Adrian caught her hands. He looked into her eyes, and for a second, the mask slipped. She saw the sheer terror he was holding back. She is alive, Adrian said. Russo sent a video. Show me, Claire demanded. Claire, you don't want to... Show me, she screamed. Adrian pulled out a tablet. He pressed play. Claire watched the shaky footage. She saw Emma sitting on the mattress. She saw the fear in her daughter's eyes. She heard the small, trembling request for her mom. Claire let out a sound that wasn't human. It was a keen of pure agony. Her legs gave out. Adrian caught her. He sank to the floor with her, wrapping his arms around her as she fell apart. She buried her face in his chest, sobbing so hard her whole body convulsed. It's my fault. She wailed. "I did this. I brought her into this. I am so sorry. Emma, oh God, I am so sorry." Adrian held her tight, one hand pressing her head against his shoulder, the other gripping her back. He absorbed her grief. He let her shake. "No," he said, his voice a low rumble against her ear. "You did not do this. I did this. My world did this." He pulled back enough to look at her. He cupped her tear-stained face in his large hands. His eyes were dry, but they burned with a fire that made Claire gasp. "I am going to get her," Adrian promised. "I swear to you on my mother's grave. Claire, I am going to walk into that warehouse, and I am going to bring her out." He stood up, pulling Claire to her feet. He wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "And if Victor Russo has touched a single hair on her head," Adrian said, his voice dropping to a whisper that was louder than a scream, "I will burn this entire city to the ground to make his pyre." He turned to leave, checking his weapon one last time. "Wait," Claire said, grabbing his arm. Adrian stopped. "Bring her home," she whispered. "I will," he said. He walked out of the door, into the night, moving toward the war he had been trying to avoid, ready to become the monster she feared in order to save the child they both loved. The map of the Harborview docks was spread out across the cheap laminate table of the safe house, illuminated by a single flickering overhead bulb. Adrian Valenti stared at it, his eyes tracing the labyrinth of shipping containers and warehouses, his mind calculating angles, shadows, and time. He was already wearing the tactical vest, the black fabric absorbing the dim light. He looked less like a businessman now and more like the soldier he had once been, a man carved from granite and regret. Sal, his lieutenant, stood on the other side of the table, phone in hand. "The decoy is set," Sal said, his voice low. "We have 3 cars heading toward the North Industrial Park. We leaked the location to one of Russo's snitches 10 minutes ago. If Victor takes the bait, he will pull half his muscle to intercept us there. That leaves the South Warehouse exposed," Adrian said, his finger tapping a red circle on the map. "That is where she is. It is the only building with a basement level that has not been flooded in years. Victor likes the dark. I have the team ready," Sal confirmed. 4 men. Silent approach, no guns unless absolutely necessary, Adrian ordered, his tone leaving no room for argument. "A stray bullet goes through a wall. It could hit her. We go in with knives in hands. We take them down quiet." Sal nodded and stepped out to brief the men. Adrian stood alone for a moment, the silence of the room pressing in on him. He reached for his sidearm, checking the safety. When the bedroom door behind him opened, Claire stood there. She looked as though she had not slept in a week. Her eyes were red, her face pale, but her jaw was set with a fierce determination that made his chest ache. She was wearing jeans and a thick sweater, her sneakers tied tight. "I am coming with you," she said. Adrian turned slowly, holstering his weapon. "No, she is my daughter. Adrian." Claire stepped forward, her hands balled into fists at her sides. "I am not sitting in this room waiting for a phone call. I need to be there. If she is scared, she needs me. You cannot come." "Claire." "Why? Because I am weak? Because I will get in the way? Because if you are there, I will not be able to think," Adrian said, his voice cracking with the strain of holding back his own terror. He crossed the room, stopping just inches from her. He looked down at her, seeing the fire in her eyes that matched his own. "If you are in that warehouse," Adrian said, speaking rapidly, urgently, "my focus will be split. I will be watching every corner for you instead of watching for the men who want to kill us. I need to be a machine tonight, Claire. I need to be cold. If I am worrying about you taking a bullet, I will hesitate, and if I hesitate, Emma dies." The words hit her like a physical blow. Claire's defiance crumbled, replaced by a raw, agonizing fear. She let out a ragged breath, her shoulders sagging. "I can't lose her," she whispered, the tears spilling over again. "I can't survive that. Adrian, you won't lose her," he vowed. He reached out to touch her arm, a gesture of comfort. But the moment his skin brushed hers, the air in the room shifted, the fear, the adrenaline, the terror of the looming separation, it all combusted into something else. Claire didn't pull away. Instead, she stepped closer, closing the final inch between them. She reached up, grabbing his face with both hands, her fingers digging into his jawline. "Bring her back," she commanded fiercely, "and bring yourself back." She kissed him. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a collision. It was desperate and terrified and hungry. A kiss born on the edge of a cliff. Claire pressed her body against his, her mouth opening to him, demanding everything he had. Adrian let out a low groan, a sound of surrendered control, his arms wrapped around her, crushing her to his chest. He lifted her easily, walking them backward until his legs hit the edge of the narrow bed. They sank down together. Adrian didn't let go. He couldn't let go. He sat on the edge of the mattress, pulling her between his spread legs. Claire scrambled closer, her knees on the bed, her body pressed along the full length of his. She was frantic, her hands roaming over his chest, gripping the tactical vest, trying to feel the man beneath the armor. "Take it off," she gasped against his mouth. Adrian broke the kiss for a split second to rip the Velcro straps of the vest open. He shrugged it off, letting the heavy equipment thud to the floor. Claire's hands slid up under his black t-shirt instantly. Her palms were cool against his fever-hot skin. She traced the ridges of his ribs, finding the old, jagged scars that mapped his violent history. She didn't flinch. She pressed into them, as if trying to heal the past with her touch in the present. Adrian shuddered, his head falling forward to rest against her shoulder. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, breathing in her scent, vanilla and rain, trying to brand it into his memory. "I was so afraid," he murmured against her skin, his hands moving to cup her face, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones. "When I saw that empty bus stop, I felt my world end." Claire. Claire pulled back just enough to look at him. Her eyes were searching his, wide and dark. She saw the vulnerability he hid from the rest of the world. She saw the boy who had lost his mother, now the man terrified of losing his family. She wrapped her legs around his waist, pulling him deeper into her. The friction, the heat, the sheer weight of their bodies pressed together was intoxicating. It was a grounding force in a world that was spinning out of control. Adrian kissed her again, slower this time, but with a searing intensity. He laid her back against the pillows, his body hovering over hers, supporting his weight on his forearms so he wouldn't crush her. He moved with a reverence that belied the violence awaiting him outside. His hand slid to her waist, his fingers tightening on her hip, anchoring her. Claire arched into him, her fingers tangling in his dark hair, pulling his mouth down to hers. They breathed each other's air, their hearts hammering a frantic, synchronized rhythm against their ribs. It was not about pleasure. It was about existence. It was about proving they were alive, here, now. Before he walked into the darkness, Adrian pulled back, his forehead resting against hers. They stayed like that for a long moment, eyes closed, breathing hard, the silence filled with the heavy, unspoken weight of their feelings. "I have to go," he whispered, the words tearing out of his throat. Claire let out a shaky sob, but she nodded. She untangled her legs from his waist and sat up as he stood. She smoothed his shirt, her hands lingering on his chest over his heart. "Come back to me," she said. Adrian looked at her one last time, memorizing the curve of her jaw, the swell of her lip, the way the light caught her hair. He wanted to stay. He wanted to lock the door and never leave this room, but the image of Emma in that warehouse flashed in his mind. "I will," he said. He grabbed his vest and weapon, turned, and walked out the door without looking back, knowing that if he looked back, he might not have the strength to leave. The docks were a graveyard of rusted metal and deep shadows. The rain had started again, a cold, miserable drizzle that slicked the pavement and obscured the moonlight. Adrian moved through the shipping containers like a ghost. He was flanked by Sal and 3 other men, all moving in perfect silence. They communicated with hand signals, their footsteps lost in the rhythmic lapping of the harbor water against the pylons. The south warehouse loomed ahead, a rotting corrugated steel beast. 2 guards stood at the side entrance, smoking cigarettes, their posture relaxed. They had heard the sirens wailing toward the North Industrial Park and assumed the threat was miles away. Adrian signaled to the man on his left. The takedown was clinical. Two shadows detached themselves from the darkness. There was no shouting, no gunfire, just the soft sounds of struggle, a muffled grunt, and the dragging of bodies into the shadows. Adrian stepped over the unconscious guard and tried the door, locked. He produced a set of bolt cutters from his pack and snapped the padlock. The sound was no louder than a twig breaking. They entered the warehouse. It was a cavernous space, filled with crates and machinery. The only light came from a portable floodlight set up in the center of the floor, illuminating a metal staircase that led down to the basement level. "Clear," Sal whispered in his earpiece. Adrian took the lead. He moved down the stairs, his gun drawn now, but pointed at the ground. He reached the bottom and found a hallway lined with storage rooms. At the end of the hall, a single chair sat outside a heavy steel door. A guard was dozing in it, a shotgun across his lap. Adrian didn't wait for the team. He surged forward. The guard opened his eyes a fraction of a second too late. Adrian slammed the butt of his pistol into the man's temple. The guard crumpled without a sound. Adrian holstered his gun and grabbed the keys from the guard's belt. His hands, usually steady as stone, trembled slightly as he found the right key. He unlocked the door and swung it open. The room was small and smelled of mildew. In the corner, huddled on a pile of old blankets, was a small shape. "Emma?" Adrian whispered. The little girl lifted her head. Her face was streaked with dirt and tears. She blinked against the light from the hallway, her body tensing as she expected another one of Victor's men. When she saw him, saw the familiar dark suit, the intense eyes, the face that had helped her with her math homework, her expression crumpled. "Adrian!" She scrambled up and ran to him. Adrian dropped to his knees and caught her. She slammed into his chest, her small arms wrapping around his neck in a stranglehold. He buried his face in her hair, checking her instantly. Limbs, head, back. She was shaking, but she was whole. "I've got you," he choked out, his voice thick with emotion. "I've got you. Sweetie, you are safe. I want my mom." Emma sobbed into his tactical vest. "She is waiting for you. Adrian promised. We are going to her right now." He stood up, lifting Emma into his arms. She wrapped her legs around his waist and buried her face in his neck, refusing to look at the room. "Let's move," Adrian commanded his team. They moved back up the stairs, a tight formation around Adrian and the child. They reached the main floor of the warehouse and headed for the exit. Slow clap echoed through the empty space. Adrian froze. Victor Russo stepped out from behind a stack of crates near the exit. He was smiling, but his eyes were black pits of malice. He held a revolver in his hand, pointed loosely at Adrian. Behind him, 3 more men appeared, blocking the path. "I knew you were sentimental." "Valenti," Victor drawled, his voice echoing off the metal walls. "But I didn't think you were stupid. Did you really think I would leave the prize unguarded?" Adrian shifted his weight, turning his body to shield Emma. "Put the gun down, Victor," Adrian said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "You have lost. The police are already swarming your decoy. They will be here in 5 minutes." Victor laughed. 5 minutes is a lifetime. "Put the girl down, Adrian. Maybe I will let you walk away." "Never." Victor's smile vanished. "Have it your way." Victor raised the gun. Adrian didn't wait. He shouted, "Down," and dropped to a crouch, shielding Emma with his entire body as chaos erupted. Sal and the team engaged Victor's men. Gunfire erupted, loud, deafening cracks that made Emma scream. Adrian saw Victor aiming at him. He couldn't return fire while holding the child. He saw an opening. "Run to Sal," Adrian ordered Emma, setting her down behind a heavy crate. "Run." Emma scrambled away. Adrian surged forward. He was a blur of motion, covering the 20 feet between him and Victor before the other man could adjust his aim. Victor fired. Adrian felt a white-hot hammer blow to his left side, just above the hip. The impact staggered him, stealing his breath, but he didn't stop. He crashed into Victor, tackling him to the concrete floor. The revolver skittered away into the darkness. It wasn't a fight. It was an execution of rage. Adrian pinned Victor down. He rained blows down on the man's face, heavy, precise strikes that broke bone and cartilage. Victor fought back, clawing at Adrian's wound, but Adrian was running on pure adrenaline and protective fury. He grabbed Victor by the lapels of his jacket and slammed him back against the concrete. Victor was bloodied, gasping for air, one eye swollen shut. Adrian's hand went to his own belt. He pulled his knife. He held the blade to Victor's throat, a single slice, and the threat would be gone forever. His blood roared in his ears. Every instinct screamed at him to finish it. "Do it," Victor wheezed, blood bubbling on his lips. "Be the animal you are." Adrian stared down at him. He thought of Claire. He thought of the life he was trying to build. He thought of Emma watching from behind the crate. If he killed him, he was just a mobster. If he let him live, he was something else. Adrian pulled the knife back. "No," Adrian spat. "Death is too easy for you." He stood up, clutching his bleeding side. He kicked Victor hard in the ribs, knocking the wind out of him, ensuring he wouldn't get up. "We leave him for the cops," Adrian shouted to his team. "Let him rot in a cell. Let everyone know Victor Russo was beaten and left alive. It's a worse ending." Sal had secured the exit. The sirens were close now. Real sirens, screaming toward the docks. Adrian limped over to the crate. Emma was curled in a ball, hands over her ears. "Emma," Adrian said, keeping his voice steady despite the agony in his side. "It's over." He scooped her up again. The pain in his side was a sharp, tearing fire, but he didn't let it show. He carried her out into the rain, leaving the violence behind them. The safe house was quiet, the air thick with tension. Claire was pacing by the window, chewing her fingernails until they bled. She heard the car pull up. She threw the door open before the engine cut. Adrian stepped out of the back seat. He was moving stiffly, favoring his left side, but in his arms, wrapped in his jacket, was Emma. "Mommy!" Emma practically flew from Adrian's arms. Claire dropped to her knees on the wet grass. Emma collided with her, and Claire wrapped her arms around her daughter, squeezing her so tight she was afraid she might break her. Oh God, I have you," Claire sobbed, burying her face in Emma's neck, smelling the mildew and the rain. You're okay. She held her daughter for a long minute, rocking her back and forth, the relief washing over her in overwhelming waves. Then slowly, she looked up. Adrian was standing a few feet away, leaning heavily against the car. The porch light cast a yellow glow over him. His face was gray. His shirt, white beneath the open tactical vest, was stained with a spreading blossom of dark red on the left side. His hand was pressed against it, blood seeping between his fingers. "Adrian?" Claire whispered. She stood up, keeping one hand on Emma's shoulder. "Go inside, baby," Claire told Emma, her voice trembling. "Go to the bathroom and wash your face. There are cookies in the kitchen. Go." Emma looked at Adrian, then at her mom, and ran inside. Claire turned to Adrian. He looked at her, tried to smile, and swayed. "I brought her back," he rasped. Claire rushed to him. She slid her arm around his waist to support him, feeling the heat of his blood soaking into his clothes. "You're hurt," she said, panic rising in her throat. "We need a doctor. Sal is calling the medic," Adrian said, his knees buckling slightly. I need to sit down." Claire helped him into the house, guiding him to the couch. He collapsed onto it with a groan, his head falling back against the cushions. Claire knelt beside him. She pushed his hands away from the wound. "Let me see," she said. Her hands, usually so steady, were shaking. She unbuttoned his shirt, peeling the fabric away from his skin. The bullet had grazed his side, carving a deep furrow through the muscle. It was bleeding heavily, ugly and angry, but it hadn't hit an organ. "It's a graze," Claire breathed, relief making her light-headed. "It's just a graze." She grabbed a clean towel from the table and pressed it against the wound. Adrian hissed in pain, his hand coming down to cover hers, gripping her fingers tight. "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears mingling with the sweat on her face. "I'm sorry I hurt you." Adrian opened his eyes. He looked at her, his gaze hazy but intense. "You didn't hurt me." He said. Claire looked at the blood on her hands. His blood. She looked at the bruises on his knuckles. She looked at the man who had walked into hell to save her child. She realized then that the fear was gone, the fear of his world, the fear of his past. It didn't matter. What mattered was this. What mattered was that he had come back. She leaned forward, pressing her forehead against his chest, right over his beating heart. "I love you," she whispered into his skin. Adrian went still. "I love you," she said again, looking up at him, her eyes fierce and wet. "Even if it terrifies me, even if you are crazy, I love you, Adrian." Adrian looked at her with wonder. He reached up with his free hand, cupping the back of her head, pulling her down. He kissed her. It tasted of copper and exhaustion, but it was the sweetest thing he had ever known. "I love you too," he whispered against her lips, and as the sound of the ambulance sirens grew louder in the distance, for the first time in his life, the sound didn't mean danger. It meant he had something worth surviving for. The fallout from the docks was not the silence Adrian had hoped for. It was a roar that shook the foundations of Harborview. Victor Russo, battered and broken in a hospital bed, did exactly what Adrian knew a man like him would do. He did not hold his tongue. He did not honor the code of silence. Faced with 30 years in a federal penitentiary, Victor opened his mouth and offered the FBI everything he had on the Valenti organization, in the safe house. The air was thick with the static of police scanners and the hum of anxious conversations. Adrian stood by the window, watching the street through a crack in the blinds. His side was bandaged, the wound throbbing with a dull, persistent ache that matched the rhythm of his thoughts. Sal walked into the room, his face gray. "They are issuing warrants," Sal said, his voice low. "RICO charges, money laundering, conspiracy." Victor gave them dates. Adrian, he gave them the construction contracts. He gave them the names of the union reps. Adrian didn't turn around. He just watched a stray cat pick its way across the wet pavement outside. "It is over," Adrian said softly. Sal took a step forward. "We can fight this, boss. We have lawyers. We can suppress the evidence. We can—" "No," Adrian cut him off, turning to face his lieutenant. "We cannot fight this. Not this time." Adrian walked to the table where a stack of external hard drives and leather-bound ledgers sat. These were the crown jewels of his empire, the proof of every bribe, every payoff, every illicit deal made in the last decade. He picked up a black marker and wrote evidence on the box. "What are you doing?" Sal asked, his eyes widening in horror. "I am dismantling the machine. Sal, as long as I am the boss, as long as this organization exists, they will come for me. And if they come for me, they come for her." He looked toward the hallway, where Claire and Emma were sleeping in the back room. "I promised her she would be safe," Adrian said. "I cannot keep that promise if I am looking over my shoulder every second of every day." Sal shook his head, looking at the box as if it contained a bomb. "This is suicide. You hand that over and you go away for life. You destroy everything we built." "I am not destroying it," Adrian said, his voice steel. "I am trading it." Claire found him an hour later. He was sitting on the floor of the living room, surrounded by boxes. He looked less like a Mafia don and more like a man packing for a long trip he didn't want to take. She stood in the doorway, her arms wrapped around herself. She had heard the shouting match with Sal. She knew enough to know what the boxes meant. "You are going to prison," she said. It wasn't a question. Adrian looked up. His eyes were tired, dark circles bruising the skin beneath them, but his gaze was steady. "I am negotiating a surrender," he corrected. "It is the same thing," Claire said, her voice trembling. She walked into the room and knelt beside him. "Why? Why would you do this? We can run. We can go somewhere they don't know us and live like fugitives?" Adrian asked gently. Dragging Emma from motel to motel? Teaching her to lie about her last name? Waiting for the door to be kicked in? He reached out and took Claire's hand. His thumb brushed over her knuckles. "That is not a life, Claire. That is just another prison." Claire pulled her hand away, anger flashing in her eyes. "So your solution is to leave us? To let them lock you in a cage for 20 years? "It won't be 20, Adrian said. "I have enough on the judges and the city council to cut a deal. But yes, I have to go away for a while." It is the price for the immunity. Immunity? For you. And for Emma. Adrian leaned forward, his intensity burning the air between them. I am giving them the empire. Claire, every contact, every account, in exchange. The federal prosecutor agrees that you and Emma are victims, civilians. You get relocation assistance. You get new identities if you want them. But mostly, you get to walk away clean. No charges, no looking back. I don't care about the charges. Claire cried, tears finally spilling over. I care about you. I just got you back. You can't ask me to let you go again. I have to, Adrian whispered. He grabbed her shoulders, pulling her close. Listen to me. Victor is just the beginning. There will always be another Victor, another rival, another prosecutor. If I stay in this life, eventually, they will hurt you to get to me. I cannot live with that. I cannot look at Emma and know that I am the reason she is in danger, Claire sobbed, shaking her head against his chest. It's not fair. No, Adrian agreed, resting his chin on her head. It is not fair, but it is the only way to break the cycle. He pulled back to look her in the eye. I need you to promise me something. Claire? What? She choked out. Promise me that while I am gone, you will live. You will not wait in the dark. You will build a life for Emma. You will let her go to school and have friends and not be afraid. Promise me you will be happy. Claire looked at him, at the sacrifice etched into every line of his face. She realized then that this was the greatest act of love he could offer. He was destroying his own world to ensure hers could survive. I promise, she whispered. The night before he was set to turn himself in, the safe house felt suspended in time. The world outside ceased to exist. There were no lawyers, no feds, no hitmen. There was only the quiet hum of the heating vent and the soft breathing of two people trying to memorize each other. They lay on top of the covers in the small bedroom, fully clothed at first, side by side. Their fingers were intertwined, resting on the mattress between them. Tell me about your mother, Claire said softly, staring up at the water stain on the ceiling. Adrian was silent for a long moment. She made the best Sunday gravy, he said, his voice rasping slightly. She used to sing in the kitchen. She had a terrible voice, but she sang loud. She wanted me to be an architect. She hated the neighborhood. She hated the guys on the corner. When she got sick, I was just so angry that I couldn't build her a better house. I wanted to be a teacher, and Claire confessed. Before Tyler, before everything. I wanted to teach history. I wanted to tell kids stories about how the world changed. You still can, Adrian said, squeezing her hand. They talked for hours. They traded stories like currency, filling in the blanks of the years they had missed. They talked about Emma's favorite colors, about the way the ocean smelled in October, about the fear of being alone and the terror of being known. Slowly, the conversation shifted. The words became fewer, the spaces between them filled with heavy, charged silence. Adrian turned on his side, propping himself up on one elbow to look down at her. In the dim light, he looked younger, the weight of the boss falling away to reveal the man. I am going to miss looking at you, he whispered. Claire reached up, her hand cupping his jaw, her thumb tracing the line of his lips. Don't talk like you are dying, she said fiercely. You are just going away. It feels the same, he admitted. He leaned down and kissed her. It was slow, a reverence. He tasted of mint and sorrow. Claire made a small sound in her throat and pulled him closer, needing to feel the weight of him, the reality of him. She climbed onto his lap, straddling him, her hands tangling in his dark hair. They kissed with a deep, aching intensity, an urgency born of the ticking clock. Every touch was a desperate attempt to imprint the sensation onto their skin. Adrian's hands roamed over her back, her shoulders, learning the curve of her spine through her shirt. He pulled her flush against him, their bodies molding together like two pieces of the same puzzle that had finally found each other. Claire buried her face in the curve of his neck, breathing him in, the scent of sandalwood, soap, and man. She felt his heart hammering against her chest, a frantic rhythm that matched her own. I love you, she whispered into his skin. I am scared, he whispered back, the confession raw and terrifying coming from a man who had faced down guns without blinking. "I know," she said, kissing the pulse point at his throat. "I am here. I am right here." They didn't rush. There was no need to rush. The night stretched out, a stolen eternity. Hands slid under shirts, skin met skin, warm and electric. They held each other with a fierce, protective grip, surrendering to the intimacy they had denied themselves for so long. It was a language of touch, a silent conversation of, "I am yours, and you are mine," spoken in the quiet dark before the dawn came to take him away. The morning sun was blindingly bright when Adrian Valenti walked up the steps of the federal building. He was alone. He had ordered Marco and Sal to stand down. He wore his best suit, a charcoal three-piece that fit him like armor. In his hand, he carried a simple leather briefcase. He did not look back at the black sedan parked across the street where Claire sat with Emma, watching through tinted windows. He couldn't. If he looked back, he wouldn't be able to take the next step. He walked through the revolving doors. He approached the security checkpoint. The guard looked up, bored, then did a double take, his eyes widening as he recognized the face from the wanted bulletins. "I am Adrian Valenti," Adrian said, his voice calm and carrying across the lobby. "I believe the United States Attorney is expecting me." He lifted the briefcase and set it on the table. "Inside is the end of the Valenti crime family," he said. "I am ready to make a deal." The courtroom was packed. It had been 6 months since the surrender. Months of depositions, grand juries, and the systematic dismantling of a criminal empire. Adrian stood before the judge. He looked thinner, the prison jumpsuit a stark contrast to his tailored suits. His hair was shorter, his face sharper. "Mr. Valenti," the judge said, peering over her glasses, "you have pleaded guilty to charges of racketeering and conspiracy. You have provided substantial assistance to the government, leading to the indictment of over 40 individuals, including corrupt officials and violent offenders. The prosecution has recommended leniency." Adrian stood tall, his hands cuffed in front of him. He did not look at the judge. He looked at the gallery. In the second row, Claire sat. She was wearing a blue dress, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Beside her, Emma sat, swinging her legs, looking brave. When Adrian caught Emma's eye, the little girl gave him a small, shy wave. Adrian's heart squeezed. "Do you have anything to say before sentencing?" the judge asked. Adrian turned back to the bench. "I did what I did to survive, Your Honor," Adrian said clearly, "and I am doing this to live. I accept the judgment." The gavel banged. 7 years, the judge announced, with credit for cooperation and time served, eligible for parole in 4. It was a miracle. It was a lifetime. As the bailiffs led him away, Adrian looked back one last time. Claire was crying, but she was smiling. She mouthed 2 words to him across the crowded room. "We wait." Adrian nodded, and then the heavy oak doors closed behind him. Time moves differently when you are waiting. For Claire, it moved in the rhythm of school runs, parent-teacher conferences, and night classes to finish her degree. It moved in the monthly letters she wrote to a P.O. box in upstate New York, letters filled with drawings from Emma and stories about the neighborhood. For Adrian, it moved in the count of push-ups, the pages of books read in a lonely cell, and the singular, burning hope of a Tuesday in November. 3 years and 8 months later, the heavy steel gate of the correctional facility slid open with a grinding mechanical shriek. Adrian Valenti stepped out. He was wearing jeans and a white t-shirt, clothes that Claire had sent him a week ago. The wind was cold, biting at his skin, but it tasted sweet. It tasted of freedom. He shielded his eyes against the sun. A silver sedan was parked at the edge of the lot. The driver's door opened. Claire stepped out. She looked older, tired perhaps, but radiant. Her hair was longer, loose around her shoulders. Then the back door opened. A girl stepped out. She was tall now, her legs lanky, her blonde curls tamed into a braid. She was holding a piece of poster board with glitter glue lettering that sparkled in the sun. "Welcome home." Adrian stopped. His breath caught in his throat. Emma ran. She didn't wait for him to move. She sprinted across the asphalt, dropping the sign. Adrian met her halfway. He dropped to his knees, ignoring the impact, and caught her. She was heavy now, solid and real. "I got taller," Emma cried into his shoulder. "You did?" Adrian laughed, his voice rough with disuse. "You got so tall." He looked up. Claire was standing there, a few feet away, giving them space but unable to stop the tears streaming down her face. Adrian stood up, keeping one arm around Emma. He reached out with the other. Claire walked into him. He wrapped his arm around her waist and pulled her in, burying his face in her neck. She smelled the same, vanilla and rain. "Hi," she whispered. "Hi." He said, "Are you ready?" she asked, pulling back to look at him. Adrian looked at the prison walls behind him, then at the two people standing in front of him. "Yes," he said, "take me home." The house was small. It was a bungalow in a quiet suburb, miles away from Harborview and the ghosts of the docks. It had a porch that needed painting and a garden that was overgrown. But it was theirs, bought with the money Claire had earned as a certified accountant. Legitimate, clean, safe. The evening air was cool. Inside, the kitchen was warm and smelled of garlic and basil. Emma was at the kitchen table, groaning over algebra now instead of simple addition. "Mom, this doesn't make sense," she complained. Adrian, standing at the stove stirring the sauce, tapped the wooden spoon against the pot. "Bring it here," he said. Emma brought the book over. Adrian looked at the equation. He didn't frown. He didn't look terrifying. He just looked like a man trying to remember 8th grade math. Isolate the x. "Emma," he said gently, "just like we talked about, move the noise away until you find the answer." Claire was chopping salad at the counter. She watched them. The former crime boss and the teenager, bent over a textbook. A warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the oven. She walked over and leaned against Adrian's side. He immediately wrapped his free arm around her, pulling her against his hip without looking away from the math problem. "Happy?" he murmured, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Claire rested her head on his shoulder. "We have a mortgage, a leaky faucet, and a teenager who hates algebra," she listed. "So?" "So?" Claire smiled, closing her eyes. "It is perfect." Later that night, after Emma had gone to bed, they sat on the back porch under a heavy wool blanket. The neighborhood was silent. Save for the distant bark of a dog, the sky was clear, a canvas of deep indigo scattered with stars. Adrian held Claire close, his arm around her waist, his hand resting flat against her stomach. He looked at his own hand. The scars were still there on his knuckles, fading white lines that told a story of violence. But his hand was relaxed. It wasn't a fist anymore. He looked out at the dark yard. He didn't check the perimeter. He didn't scan for threats. He just watched the fireflies dancing in the grass. "What are you thinking?" Claire whispered, tracing the line of his jaw. Adrian turned to look at her. His eyes, once so cold and empty, were full of a quiet, steady light. "I am thinking that I spent my whole life building an empire of fear," he said softly. "I thought that was power." He tightened his arm around her, pulling her so close there was no space left between them. "But this? Sitting here with you? Knowing she is asleep safe in her room?" He kissed Claire's forehead, a lingering, gentle touch. "This is the only empire that matters." Claire smiled, curling into his side, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Welcome home, Adrian," she whispered. "I am home," he answered. They sat there in the quiet dark, two survivors who had walked through fire to find each other, building a life that needed no secrets, no weapons, and no walls, only love, hard work, and the family they had chosen. Thank you so much for listening to the complete story of Adrian and Claire in Sir, My Mom's Not Waking Up. I hope you enjoyed this journey of redemption, sacrifice, and the healing power of love. I would love to know what you thought of the ending. Please leave a comment down below sharing your favorite part of the story and let me know where you are listening from. I love seeing our community grow around the world. If you enjoyed this story, please don't forget to like the video and subscribe to Mafia romance stories for more emotional, realistic, and heart-pounding tales every week. Your support means the world to me. See you in the next story.